very interesting entity. People call him the passive one, but they're wrong. He's not. In any respect is he passive. He aggressively caused inaction, but that's not necessarily passive. Again, look, his childhood was pretty good. He just didn't want to follow in the steps of his father. He wanted to create his own pathway, and he went off and did his study in England as a barrister and went and did work in South Africa, and then found his way back to India when the time was right. His contribution to the world at the time, well, the English wouldn't love it because it effectively got them out of India, but his methodology was quite simple. They were very pompous and arrogant and living totally different to the Indians and the means available to the Indians, and he saw a great inequality, and they carried off their pomp with the way that they dressed, etc. So Gandhi took a perverse delight in underdressing and getting in even half an Indian robe and doing whatever he could to demean them, and they were highly offended. How Gandhi operated was in many ways similar to Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse, when he needed to incite the soldiers to break their discipline and lead them into traps, would bare his bum to them, and they would be incensed at that. So he's very provocative, and then Gandhi was doing a similar thing to the English by baring almost all of his body, not perhaps his bum, but that was about the only thing he wasn't, and eating with his fingers and things like that they thought were savage. They were similar in their methodologies. What he effectively said to the Indians was, there's 300,000 of them, there's 300 million of us, and they're winning because you're agreeing. Let's not do that. And enough followed him, and his voice was actively be inactive. Actively don't do anything. No violence, but just don't agree. They haven't the resources to get you all. Eventually we're going to win this. And he did, and he won their independence, and that changed the course of the history of India. So he was incredibly powerful at bringing people together as well, but he wasn't passive. He's an entity who believed and still does in action. He believes in solutions, and he's incredibly wise. He really is deeply wise. His plan of action that he put into place in India at the time was just brilliant, and it worked, and it gave an independence, and what he's after as much as anything is independence now for each individual.
He's very astute at recognising deceit.
He has a very strong effect upon the work of Pearl and I on a daily basis as to how we do things, and that's not to be put off by size, it's not to be put off by power, it's just to keep going. Gandhi, one of his beauties, he didn't care that they made a joke of him, that they made a fool of him, they made out to the whole world that this was some nobody. He stood up to all of that and stood by his beliefs. His great gift, you can't ridicule me.
We're now commencing a trance mediumship session with Ian. We will now talk with Mahatma Gandhi.
All that I wanted was for the people of my country to be free, to be independent, and have the ability to feel better about themselves, because what I recognized in my country was that the people did not feel as they felt constrained to follow cultures which were not their cultures, which were not the cultures in the history of the Indian people. I traveled far and I traveled wide before I took on the responsibility that I felt I needed to within India. And that was to try and understand other worlds, to try and understand this need for different and vastly different cultures. But mostly I wanted to understand why the people of India would want to follow another culture that represented something different to themselves, without in any respect trying to decry the English of the time. I wanted to break down the reverence, and I wanted to break down the fear that people had because they wanted to do and act differently. They wanted to be themselves. They wanted to find an India. And I felt I needed to show a way to liberty, as is known I did not do this passively. I did it aggressively, but I did not want it to be the take-up of arms, because the killing of each other needs to be avoided at any possible time that this can happen. This is not in any respect spiritual. It could be argued that what I did was against many spiritual rules. But by trying to get the people of India to recognize their power, to recognize who they were, and that they had a position in the future of the world which would one day be dominant, because this is the scope and the ability of India that I knew at the time, but that could never ever come under the rule or the guise of another country, of other cultures. So I needed people to find a belief, and that they would not find it by themselves. So what I wanted them to do was to see that they could follow me, and I would appear and act in the most simple, unobstructive way, but I would do nothing that was not the best for the people of my country. This gave people not only a belief in themselves, but an understanding that they were more powerful than they thought themselves to be. For this is the problem of dictatorships, etc. They try very hard to get the people to believe they have less power than they really have. I was working in the opposite, and it was no good to just stand and shout and scream and fight ideologies and policies, etc. I had to get to the people. I had to touch the heart of the people. This is what I tried to do. This is what I did do. Independence and great changes followed. And in time, this will have the impact which was always meant. But what I did, or what I was able to achieve, was to allow each person to look inside themselves and to recognize their power, their spirit, their energy, and to make a decision on whether or not they wanted to spend their life proud and small, or they wanted to break free and be adventurous and to find the scope of who they could be, and all the difficulties that could come with that, because it was going to be so unknown. But I tried to teach them that the joy of facing the unknown is better than the pain of living constrained. Thank you.
Gandhi, for the people of the world, and particularly our country, who is still living with threats of COVID and illness and sickness at the moment, what would you say to them to help them to get through this?
There has always been different forms of sickness within the world. It travels differently today because of the way that transport works. But whether it travels fast or slow, it still moves. It has been for so long that there has been travel between countries. This is both good and bad in what it brings, but predominantly good. Do not be fearful of something that is physical. The body is meant to overcome it. The body is meant to overcome it by itself, not with any intervention. And it is able to do that, for the body is particularly able to cope. But what is of great shame, what I fought for was liberty of people. And what has happened is that some physical illness has been used to generate great fear and used as a vehicle to take away liberty. This is the single biggest problem. Can people without a leader to help them to do that find it within themselves to move towards wanting freedom once again, so they can face an uncertain future rather than live in a certain future of dictatorship? Thank you.
Wasn't that amazing? Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to find out more about each of the council members and hear a message by Trance with Ian Rogers, be sure to like, comment or subscribe, and check out all the other videos on each of the council members on this channel. Thanks so much.